The sun hung low over the sprawling city of Zambara, casting long golden rays upon its bustling streets. Merchants hollered from their stalls, their voices rising above the rhythmic clatter of horse-drawn carts and the chatter of weary travelers. The scent of spiced meats and fresh bread drifted through the air, mingling with the rich aroma of parchment and ink from the many scholars who walked the cobbled roads. In a small, modest room at the edge of the city, Jabari packed his belongings with steady hands. His heart thrummed with excitement. After months of intense study in the grand halls of Zambara, he was finally returning home to the village of Akanzi for the grand December festival. His mother had written to him, describing the preparations, the streets draped with colorful fabrics, the aroma of roasted yams filling the air, and the rhythmic drumbeats that called the villagers to dance under the full moon. Jabari could almost hear the laughter of the children, see the flickering torches lining the village square, and feel the warmth of home. He smiled to himself as he rolled up his last parchment scroll and placed it carefully into his satchel. The journey home would be long, several days on foot through forests and winding paths, but he was eager to reunite with his loved ones. As he slung his satchel over his shoulder, a faint knock echoed against the wooden door. When he opened it, he found an elderly woman standing in the hallway. Mama Abani, a wise healer and storyteller, peered at him with knowing eyes. Though her back was slightly bent with age, there was a quiet strength in her presence. Her hands, wrinkled with time, clutched a small wooden staff carved with ancient symbols. "Young one," she said, her voice a soft murmur, "are you leaving for the village?" Jabari nodded, his lips curving into a respectful smile. "Yes, Mama Abani, the festival is near, and my family awaits me." The old woman studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "Have you prayed for your journey?" Jabari chuckled, waving a dismissive hand. "I am strong, Mama Abani. I have walked these roads before. There is nothing to fear." A shadow flickered across her eyes. She leaned on her staff and exhaled slowly. "Not all dangers can be seen, my son. Some are hidden in the wind, in the earth, and in the paths we take." A strange chill crept up Jabari's spine, but he shook it off with a forced smile. He had no time for old superstitions. "I will be fine, Mama Abani, do not worry." The old woman sighed, then reached into the folds of her robe and pulled out a small leather pouch. She pressed it into Jabari's hand, her fingers lingering for a moment as she whispered, "Take this. When the wind shifts and the shadows lengthen, scatter the dust into the air and speak the name of your ancestors." Jabari hesitated. He could see the urgency in her eyes, but his logical mind dismissed it as nothing more than tradition. Still, out of respect, he tucked the pouch into his satchel. "Thank you, Mama Abani," he said, bowing slightly before stepping past her. As he walked through the crowded streets, he could feel her gaze lingering on him. Something about her warning unsettled him, but he quickly pushed the thought aside. He had a long journey ahead, and he could not afford to dwell on the superstitions of the elders. By midday, Jabari had left the grand city behind, stepping onto the winding dirt path that stretched toward Akanzu. The sun blazed high in the sky, casting sharp shadows beneath the towering iroko trees that lined the road. Birds flitted between the branches, their songs weaving through the rustling leaves, while a gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and damp earth. He walked with confidence, his sandals kicking up dust as he hummed an old song his mother used to sing. His thoughts drifted to the home he had missed. The small hut with its thatched roof, the clay pots filled with his mother's rich stews, the laughter of his younger siblings as they chased fireflies beneath the moon. But as he journeyed deeper into the countryside, an uneasy silence settled over the land. The bird songs grew faint, and even the wind seemed to hesitate, as if holding its breath. Jabari frowned. Glancing around, the road was familiar, yet something felt off. A rustling sound echoed from the trees. He stopped, his heart pounding, his eyes scanned the shadows, but there was nothing. Only the dense foliage swaying gently in the breeze. "You're letting Mama Abani's words get to you," he muttered to himself, shaking his head. Yet as he continued walking, the feeling of being watched did not fade. The sun dipped lower, casting long fingers of shadow across the path. Jabari quickened his pace, eager to reach the riverbank where he planned to camp for the night, but as he rounded a bend, he stopped abruptly. The road ahead was gone. Where there should have been a clear path winding through the trees, there was now an expanse of dense, gnarled roots and overgrown vines. Jabari's breath hitched. He turned around, expecting to see the familiar road behind him. It was gone too. A cold dread settled in his chest. This was impossible. He had walked this road before, knew it well. Roads did not simply vanish. The wind stirred, whispering through the leaves like hushed voices. The trees swayed, their branches creaking as though they were speaking to one another. Jabari swallowed hard. He reached into his satchel, and his fingers brushed against the leather pouch Mama Abani had given him. He hesitated, remembering her words. When the wind shifts and the shadows lengthen, scatter the dust into the air, and speak the name of your ancestors. His pulse thundered in his ears. He had laughed at her warning, dismissed her as an old woman clinging to ancient beliefs, but now he was trapped in a place where logic had no meaning. A low murmur rippled through the trees, a sound not born of the wind. Something was watching, something unseen. With shaking hands, Jabari pulled out the pouch, his breath unsteady. He loosened the drawstring, and for the first time in his life, he whispered the names of his ancestors. The air thickened, the shadows shifted, and then a voice deep and resonant echoed from the darkness. "Traveler, you did not ask for protection before your journey. Now you are lost in my domain." Jabari's blood ran cold. Jabari stood frozen, his breath shallow, as the weight of the voice settled over him. The trees loomed taller, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the darkening sky. The path that had led him through familiar lands was gone, replaced by an eerie, unnatural silence. His heart pounded in his chest. The voice had spoken, yet no figure stood before him. It had come from nowhere and everywhere at once, surrounding him like the very air he breathed. Hello, Jabari stammered, his voice barely a whisper against the stillness. "Who's there?" The wind rustled the leaves in response, carrying with it a whisper of laughter, deep, resonant, and knowing. "You did not pray before your journey," the voice repeated, this time carrying a note of amusement, "and now you are lost in my domain." Jabari's grip tightened around the leather pouch Mama Ebony had given him. He had dismissed her warnings, laughed at the idea of unseen dangers, but now he stood in a place where reality itself had shifted, where the natural world obeyed laws beyond his understanding. He took a hesitant step forward, only for the ground beneath him to soften, as though he was treading upon something not quite solid. He crouched, brushing his fingers against the earth. It felt cold, too cold, as if stripped of life. Swallowing his fear, he took another cautious step. The wind picked up again, swirling through the trees like a living thing, whispering words he could not understand. Then the world around him darkened. The sky, once bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, now turned an inky black, not the natural darkness of night, but something deeper, heavier, pressing against his skin like an unseen force. Panic clawed at his chest. He spun in a circle, searching for any sign of familiarity. The trees, the road, the distant hills, all had vanished. He was surrounded by an endless expanse of shifting shadows, a void where the world had once been. This isn't real," Jabari whispered to himself. "It's a trick, a dream." A whisper slithered through the darkness. "Is it?" Jabari flinched. The voice was closer, now wrapping around him like a snake tightening its coils. He could feel something watching him, something unseen yet present, lurking just beyond the edges of his vision. His pulse thundered in his ears. He forced himself to take a deep breath. Mama Ebony's pouch. She had told him what to do. With trembling hands, he loosened the drawstring and pulled out the fine silvery dust inside. He held it in his palm, his fingers quivering. "When the wind shifts and the shadows lengthen," he murmured, repeating her words, "scatter the dust into the air and speak the name of your ancestors." The air around him grew thick, as if the unseen presence was waiting, watching his every move. He threw the dust into the air. The particles shimmered like tiny stars as they caught the non-existent light. Jabari took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and called upon those who had walked before him. "I call upon the spirits of my ancestors," he whispered, his voice growing steadier. "Guide me, protect me, and light my path." The wind howled, the darkness trembled, the world seemed to tilt as though the very ground beneath him was shifting back into place. Then a spark of light flickered before him. It was faint, barely more than a glimmer, but it grew, pulsing gently like the heartbeat of a dying ember. Jabari stepped toward it, drawn by an unseen force. The moment he did, the suffocating darkness receded, peeling away like layers of mist under the morning sun. The trees returned. The sky, once swallowed by the void, shimmered with the hues of twilight. The familiar dirt road stretched before him once more, as if it had never disappeared. Jabari gasped, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. He was back, the path had returned. But before relief could settle in his bones, a low chuckle rumbled through the air. It was the same voice as before, though now laced with a quiet amusement. "You have been given another chance, traveler," it murmured, "but remember, some roads are not meant to be walked without the blessing of those who came before you." Jabari swallowed, his hands still trembling. He had faced something beyond his understanding, something that had nearly consumed him, and yet he had been spared. He adjusted his satchel, his fingers brushing against the pouch. Once more, he would not take another step without whispering a prayer. With newfound humility, He clasped his hands together and whispered words of gratitude asking for guidance for protection, and only when he felt the weight lift from his chest did he dare to continue his journey, the road stretching before him once more. But as he walked, a single thought lingered in his mind. What would have happened if he had ignored Mama Abony's warning completely? Jabari's feet moved swiftly along the familiar path, but the weight in his chest had not lifted. The darkness that had swallowed him only moments before still clung to his thoughts like a lingering storm cloud. He had survived the first trial, but something told him that his journey was far from over. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a strange melody, a low hum, almost like a voice just beyond the range of hearing. He shook his head, trying to focus. He needed to reach the river before nightfall. The stories his grandmother had once told him of spirits that roamed the forest at night now felt less like myth and more like a warning he should have heeded long ago. With each step, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The trees no longer stood tall and proud. They seemed to lean inward, as if whispering secrets to one another, their branches intertwined above him, forming a canopy that blocked out most of the fading daylight. The path, though visible, seemed narrower than before, as if the forest itself was closing in around him. He exhaled sharply. "It's just my imagination," he muttered, though even he didn't fully believe it. A sudden rustle in the underbrush made him stop. He turned his head, eyes scanning the tangled roots and thick foliage. There was no movement, no sign of an animal, yet the sound had been distinct, deliberate. His fingers tightened around the strap of his satchel. Then a whisper, so soft, so fleeting he almost missed it. "Jabari." His breath hitched. The whisper had come from behind him. Slowly he turned, his heart hammering against his ribs. The path he had just walked was empty, no figures, no movement, only the trees standing silent and still. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice steadier than he felt. Silence. Then, a laugh, faint, distant, but undeniably real. It echoed through the trees, twisting in the wind like a shadow made of sound. It was not a friendly laugh, nor was it mocking. It was expectant, as though something unseen was waiting. Jabari's grip on his satchel tightened. He willed his legs to move, quickening his pace. The river wasn't far now. If he could just get there, if he could just... The path ended. Just as it had before. Jabari's breath came in short gasps as he stared ahead. There, in place of the dirt road, was a wall of trees that hadn't been there moments ago. Thick, gnarled roots jutted from the earth, their dark tendrils twisting as though they had always been part of the land. A cold sweat broke across his forehead. No, this isn't happening again," he whispered. He turned quickly, but the road behind him had vanished as well. He was trapped again. And then from the shadows, a figure stepped forward. It was cloaked in black, its face obscured by a deep hood, though no features were visible. Jabari felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing into him. The air around the figure rippled, as though it existed on the edge of reality itself. "You should not have ignored the warnings." The figure spoke, its voice a mere breath of sound. "Some roads do not forgive." Jabari swallowed hard. "Who are you?" The figure did not answer immediately. Instead, it raised a single pale hand and pointed toward Jabari's satchel. "You carry the blessing of the old ways, use it." Jabari hesitated, his fingers brushing against Mama Abony's pouch. Had it saved him once, perhaps, but would it work again? The whispering wind grew stronger. The trees creaked, their branches shifting as though something unseen was moving among them. Jabari had no choice. With a deep breath, he reached into the pouch, grasping another handful of the shimmering dust. This time, he did not wait. He threw it into the air and called upon his ancestors with all the strength he could muster. "Spirits of those who walked before me, grant me safe passage." The dust caught the air, swirling like tiny fireflies against the encroaching darkness. The wind shrieked, no longer a whisper, but a cry of protest. The trees trembled. The figure in the cloak stood still, watching, waiting. Then, as suddenly as the path had vanished, it returned. The trees moved, shifting as though pulled by unseen hands. The road stretched before him, once more leading toward the river. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifting. Jabari exhaled sharply. He turned back toward the figure. But it was gone. Only the echoes of its final words remained in his mind. "Some roads do not forgive." Jabari did not look back again. He ran. The river was near. He could hear it now, the rushing water like a song of salvation. He would rest there. He would gather his thoughts, regain his strength. But deep in his bones, he knew this was not over. And he knew something was following him. Jabari's legs ached, but he did not stop running. His breath came in ragged gasps, his heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. The distant roar of the river grew louder, a beacon calling him forward. Whatever had been following him through the cursed forest had not shown itself again, but he could feel it, its presence lingering in the air like a whisper just beyond his comprehension. When he finally burst through the tree line, the sight of the river filled his chest with relief. The water rushed forward, its surface glimmering under the pale moonlight. He collapsed near the edge, hands braced against the cool earth as he sucked in deep, steadying breaths. Silence wrapped around him, save for the steady rush of water. It felt different here, safer, perhaps. The weight that had clung to his spirit in the forest was lighter. Yet, he knew better than to trust appearances. The river, he murmured, remembering the stories his grandmother had told him. It carries the voices of the past. With trembling hands, he reached into his satchel and retrieved Mama Abony's pouch. He loosened the drawstring, letting the fine dust slip between his fingers. This time, he did not hesitate. He cast the shimmering dust into the air, watching as it caught the wind and drifted over the water's surface. A ripple formed in the river. Then another. The water began to shift, its once calm surface writhing as if something beneath stirred. Jabari stepped back, his pulse quickening. The river had come alive. A low hum resonated from the depths, vibrating through the air. Slowly, a figure rose from the water. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, her skin a deep, iridescent blue that shimmered under the moonlight. Her long braided hair cascaded down her back like flowing water, and her eyes, ancient and knowing, locked onto Jabari's with an intensity that rooted him in place. "You have called upon the ancestors," she spoke, her voice like the current itself. "And they have heard." Jabari swallowed hard. Who are you?" "I am Naya, keeper of the river's memory." She lifted her hands, and the water obeyed, rising and twisting in elegant spirals around her. "You walk a path burdened by fate, traveler. Do you know why?" He hesitated. I was warned. I did not listen. And now the forest, it hunts me." A small smile ghosted across Naya's lips, though her gaze remained solemn. "The forest does not hunt, child. It remembers. And it does not forget those who trespass without honor." Jabari's stomach tightened. "Then what must I do? How do I finish my journey?" Naya regarded him for a long moment before she turned toward the water. "There is a price for passage." Jabari's heart clenched. "What price?" She did not answer immediately. Instead, she extended a hand over the river. The waters churned, revealing a vision beneath its surface. Jabari gasped. He saw himself, standing at the edge of the forest once more. But this version of him looked different. Stronger. Wiser. And yet, something was missing. "This is the path before you," Naya said. "But only if you are willing to give up what weighs you down." Jabari frowned. "What do you mean?" She turned to him, her eyes piercing through his very soul. "The past you carry, the fear, the doubt, the pride that led you to ignore the warnings, these must be left behind. Only then will the forest open its path." Jabari's breath hitched. "And if I don't?" Naya's gaze darkened. "Then the shadows will claim you, and the journey will never end." A chill ran down his spine. He looked down at his hands that had carried his burdens, his regrets. Was he ready to let them go? Slowly, he reached into his satchel once more, pulling out the small wooden carving his grandmother had given him as a child. It had always been a source of comfort, a reminder of home. But now it felt heavy. With a deep breath, he stepped toward the water and let it slip from his grasp. The moment it touched the river, the water swirled, glowing with an ethereal light. A rush of energy surged through him, and in that instant he knew the journey was changing. Naya smiled. "You have chosen well. Now go. The path awaits." Jabari turned, and where once there had been only darkness, a road stretched before him once more. But the whispers had not ceased. Something still lurked in the shadows, and it was waiting. Jabari stepped onto the newly revealed path, his heart steady, but his mind uneasy. The river's secret had granted him passage, but at what cost? As he moved forward, the wind carried whispers through the trees, soft beckoning, full of promises he dared not trust. The further he walked, the more the forest changed. The twisted roots and gnarled branches that had once sought to trap him now stood tall and unmoving, watching. The night was still, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against his skin. He knew he was not alone. A flicker of movement in the corner of his vision. Jabari halted, every muscle tensing. Who's there? Silence. Then a voice smooth as silk yet thick with an unsettling familiarity. You walk a cursed path, traveler. A figure emerged from the darkness, cloaked in shadows, though its features were obscured. The air around it seemed to pulse with unnatural energy. It was neither man nor beast, but something in between, a whisper of darkness made flesh. I do not seek trouble, Jabari said, standing his ground. The shadowed figure tilted its head as if amused. Yet trouble follows you. The river has given you passage, but it has not lifted your burden. You still carry doubt, fear, weakness. Jabari clenched his fists. What do you want? A low chuckle, a bargain. Jabari hesitated. He had heard stories of spirits offering deals. None of them ended well. I need no bargain, he said, turning to continue his journey. Are you certain? The shadow's voice coiled around him like a serpent. You seek to finish your journey, to escape this place, but the road ahead is long and you are only human. Jabari exhaled sharply, refusing to acknowledge the creeping doubt in his chest. I can grant you strength, the shadow continued, the power to command the forest instead of fearing it. No more running, no more uncertainty, you will be free. Jabari looked into the darkness that clung to the figure. He could almost see something shifting within, an ancient hunger waiting. And what would you ask in return? He asked warily. The shadow's form rippled. A simple thing, a name. Jabari frowned. A name? Yes, the figure stepped closer, its voice a whisper against the wind. Give me a name, and I will grant you the power you seek. A cold sensation crawled up Jabari's spine. He did not know why, but he sensed the danger in such a request. Names carried weight. To give one's name was to give something of oneself. To name something unknown was to bind it. He shook his head. No, my journey is my own. I will not take shortcuts. The shadow stilled, then its form quivered with something like laughter. How interesting, most would have accepted. Jabari held firm, then most have been deceived. A pause, then the shadow leaned forward, its voice dropping to a whisper. Very well, but know this, when the time comes and the true path is revealed, you may wish you had taken my offer. Without another word, the figure melted into the darkness, vanishing as if it had never been there. Jabari exhaled, his body trembling with the weight of what had just transpired. He had refused the shadow's bargain, but the whispers had not ceased. Somewhere in the depths of the forest, something was waiting, and it was not done with him yet. Jabari pressed forward, his mind troubled by the shadow's warning. Though he had refused the bargain, a lingering unease settled in his bones. The forest had grown eerily quiet, the once whispering trees now standing in tense stillness, as though holding their breath. The path before him stretched deeper into darkness. He had no choice but to follow it. As he walked, his footsteps became muffled, swallowed by the thick mist curling around his ankles. The moonlight barely pierced through the dense canopy above, casting only fleeting glimpses of the way ahead. Jabari's fingers grazed the hilt of his small dagger, a meager weapon, but one that gave him comfort. A rustling sound. Something moved beyond the mist. Jabari stopped, listening. The hairs on his arms rose. He turned slowly, every instinct screaming at him to run. But he held his ground. Then a voice. Soft. Familiar. Jabari. His breath caught. He knew that voice. Mother, he whispered, his heart hammering. It was impossible. His mother had died years ago, long before he began this journey. The mist thickened, swirling like smoke, and from it emerged a shadowy figure. Her face was as he remembered, warm, kind, yet filled with sorrow. Jabari, my son, why do you run from me? Her voice carried an unnatural echo. His chest tightened. This was not real. It couldn't be. You are not my mother, he said, stepping back. You are another trick of the forest. Am I? She tilted her head. Or am I the truth you refuse to see? Her form flickered, shifting between the mother he had lost and something else. Something dark. Come, my son. Come home. She stretched out her arms, and the mist around her darkened, tendrils of shadow reaching toward him. Jabari gritted his teeth, gripping his dagger. No. My mother is at peace. You are a lie. The figure let out a chilling sigh, the warmth in her face vanishing, replaced by something cold and hollow. Then you have made your choice. The mist surged forward. Jabari dove to the side as the shadows struck where he had stood. He rolled onto his feet, breathing hard. The forest around him seemed to pulse, the trees shifting and groaning, as if coming to life. The path was closing. He had no time to hesitate. He ran. The whispers returned, hissing through the trees, angry and relentless. You cannot run forever. You will return to us. You will be ours. Jabari pushed forward, his lungs burning, his feet barely touching the ground. The mist clawed at him, but he did not stop. He could see something ahead, a faint glow, breaking through the darkness. Hope. With one final desperate leap, he burst from the mist's grasp and tumbled forward. He landed on solid ground, gasping for breath. Silence. The whispers had ceased. The mist did not follow. Slowly, Jabari lifted his head. Before him stood a vast clearing, bathed in soft moonlight. At its center, a massive stone door loomed, covered in ancient carvings that pulsed with a dim blue light. The final test. Jabari staggered to his feet, his heart still racing. The journey was far from over, but he had escaped the forest's grasp for now. He stepped forward, toward the stone door. Whatever lay beyond it, he would face it. He had come too far to turn back now. Jabari stood before the colossal stone door, its ancient carvings pulsating with an eerie blue glow. His breath came in ragged gasps, his body still trembling from the horrors of the mist. Yet he knew, this was it, the final trial. The door bore no handles, no keyholes. Only the intricate patterns of long-forgotten symbols shifting like living things beneath his gaze. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold stone, and a deep, resonating hum filled the air. The carvings flared to life, illuminating the clearing in an ethereal glow. A voice, neither male nor female, echoed in his mind. You who seek passage, prove yourself. The ground beneath Jabari trembled, and suddenly, the clearing was no longer empty. 3 figures emerged from the shimmering light, warriors of old, their armor bearing the marks of countless battles. Their eyes glowed with the same spectral blue as the door. You must face us, the central warrior intoned, his voice like rolling thunder. Only the worthy may pass. Jabari's grip on his dagger tightened. He had fought illusions, endured the torment of whispers, and resisted the temptation of the shadow's bargain. Now he was being asked to fight legends. The first warrior lunged, wielding a curved blade that gleamed unnaturally. Jabari barely had time to dodge as the weapon sliced through the air, missing him by a breath. He retaliated, striking out with his dagger, but his blade passed through the warrior as if through smoke. Panic gripped him. How could he fight an enemy he could not touch? Think, Jabari, he muttered to himself, rolling away from another strike. There must be a way. His mind raced, recalling the carvings on the door. They pulsed with the same light that filled the warrior's eyes. Perhaps they were bound to it. Dodging another strike, Jabari turned his attention to the door. Summoning his courage, he sprinted toward it, ignoring the shouts of the spectral warriors behind him. With both hands, he pressed against the carvings. A sudden force slammed into his chest, hurling him backward. He hit the ground hard, pain shooting through his ribs. The warriors stood over him now, their forms shifting like flickering flames. Unworthy, the central figure declared, raising his blade. No, Jabari shouted, pushing himself up despite the pain. I am worthy. I have resisted the tricks of this cursed land. I have not faltered. I have not run. The warriors hesitated. Jabari, breathing heavily, continued. This journey was never about strength in battle. It was about perseverance. I have faced the temptations of power and refused them. I have walked through fear and not surrendered to it. That is what makes me worthy. The spectral warriors exchanged glances. Then, as one, they stepped back. The central warrior placed a hand over his chest and bowed. You have spoken true. The greatest battle is not with the enemy, but within oneself. You have conquered doubt, fear, and temptation. You may pass. The warriors began to fade, their forms dissolving into the same blue light that pulsed through the door. The carvings flared brilliantly one last time before the stone creaked and rumbled, splitting open to reveal a passage beyond. Jabari stepped forward, his heart pounding. The air beyond the door shimmered with a golden radiance, unlike anything he had seen before. As he crossed the threshold, the weight of the cursed journey lifted from his shoulders. He had faced the trials, endured the suffering, and emerged victorious. The journey had changed him. And as he stepped into the unknown, he knew one thing for certain. His story was far from over.